Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty unique, actually. It's the evolving U.S.-Canada relationship. Specifically, President Trump bringing up Canada becoming the 51st U.S. state again.
Right, and all this is happening just as Canada's heading to a federal election next Monday. Talk about timing.
Exactly. So we pulled together some really interesting sources for this. We've got that Time interview with President Trump.
Yep, and a lot of coverage from CBC News, CTV News, looking at the Canadian election side, reactions to what Trump's been saying.
And there's also a Financial Times analysis looking at, well, social media and the election.
Which seems increasingly important these days.
Oh, it is. So our mission, really, is to get past the headlines, the sort of election noise, and figure out the core issues here. What's really shaping this relationship and, why should you care?
Okay, so where do we start? That 51st state comment seems like the obvious place.
Yeah, let's start there. He told Time magazine he's, quote, really not trolling about this.
Which is quite something. And his reasoning, well, he argues the relationship only works, in his view, if Canada becomes a state.
Right, he mentioned the U.S. taking care of their military.
And, maybe more surprisingly, said the U.S. doesn't need Canadian cars or lumber or even energy.
That's a big statement.
It is, and he apparently wouldn't mind if, adding territory was part of his legacy.
It sort of fundamentally misunderstands the NORAD agreement, doesn't it? And Canada's role there.
It definitely simplifies a very complex security partnership, yeah. It sets a particular tone.
And it seems like this isn't just aimed at Trudeau anymore, like maybe people thought before.
No, because the current PM, Mark Carney, he is confirmed, Trump brought this up, even in a phone call back in March.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Carney said Trump brings this up all the time, but Carney's stance was, well, very clear, it will never happen.
Unequivocal.
Pretty much. And then Trump, speaking to the BBC, he confirmed they'd had very nice conversations with Carney, but then he said, it's not appropriate for me to get involved in their election.
Despite repeatedly talking about the 51st state idea right before their election.
Exactly. It does seem a bit contradictory, doesn't it? Is it strategy or just maybe inconsistent messaging?
Hard to say for sure. But you can imagine how this is playing out in Canada. The reports say it's rattled Canadian leaders and infuriated residents.
Could even be boosting Canadian patriotism, some suggest.
Yeah, possibly. And remember when he called Trudeau governor? Kind of fits a pattern, maybe.
It does seem to fit his, let's say, transactional and sometimes unilateral approach to international relations, that framing of the U.S. taking care of Canada.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly, though it's all connected. Trade and tariffs.
Ah, yes, the other big piece.
Trump told Time he's made 200 deals on trade since pausing new tariffs.
Right, but, well, the White House hasn't actually announced these deals.
No details given.
No specifics at all. He did say he expects negotiations to wrap up soon, but, maybe with adjustments.
And he also threw out the idea that 50% tariffs would be a total victory for the U.S. economy.
Which, setting aside the victory language, 50% tariffs would have huge ripple effects globally, and certainly for Canada.
Absolutely. Canada's already dealing with 25% U.S. tariffs on some things, stuff outside the USMCA trade deal.
Plus the global tariffs on steel, aluminum, cars.
Yeah, and those have caused temporary layoffs in Canada's auto sector already. Remember back in March, Trump put that 25% tariff just on Canadian-made cars.
Yes, and that got a strong reaction from the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre. He condemned it.
And now this is really becoming election fodder, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. PM Carney is basically saying the Liberals are the only ones who can really handle Trump and these tariffs.
And he's criticizing Poilievre, saying he doesn't have a plan for it.
That's the line, yeah. It's a key part of their pitch to voters.
Carney also made this interesting comparison. He said closing the infrastructure gap for First Nations in Canada would actually have a bigger positive economic impact than the negative impact of all the Trump tariffs.
That's quite a statement. It really pivots the focus back to domestic Canadian issues, even amidst this U.S. pressure.
And Trump didn't stop there. He also floated the idea of increasing auto tariffs on Canada.
While sticking to his line that Canada needs the U.S. more than the other way around.
Which seems to be his standard negotiating position, right?
Yeah.
Emphasize the power dynamic.
It is. But, the reality on the ground, the economic ties are deeply interconnected. It's a two-way street, really.
Okay, so let's talk more directly about the Canadian election itself. It's Monday, April 28th.
And as we said, Trump's comments, the tariffs, they are absolutely critical issues on the campaign trail.
Both Carney and Poilievre are really pushing the message that they are the ones best suited to manage this U.S. relationship, the economic fallout.
Yeah, navigating that uncertainty is key. And voter engagement seems, well, really high.
It's huge, isn't it?
Okay.
Over 7.3 million advance votes cast.
That's a 25% jump from the last election in 2021, plus more mail-in ballots, too.
Wow. What does that signal, do you think? High interest, a mood for change.
Could be a mix of things. Definitely suggests people are invested in this one. And the polls, they show it's getting tight.
Very close between the liberals and conservatives, yeah. Poilievre was just in Calgary, his only stop there, I think.
Right, traditional conservative territory, but the liberals hope to make some gains there.
And his message was pretty focused, criticizing liberal energy policy, the carbon tax.
Yeah. Promising an energy boom, repealing regulations. He also laid out a 100-day plan. Affordability, crime, jobs.
Standard conservative platform points, basically.
Pretty much. Meanwhile, PM Carney, he did a virtual forum with the Assembly of First Nations.
Okay.
And he doubled down on the liberal commitment to implementing UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, called it fundamental and unwavering.
Important commitment there.
Yeah, and he also pledged to bring back the First Nations Clean Water Act, keep working on that infrastructure gap we mentioned.
And did he address the Jay Treaty? That sometimes comes up with U.S.-Canada stuff.
He did. He assured them that those treaty rights wouldn't be affected by whatever's happening with the U.S. relationship.
Okay. And then there's the NDP, Jagmeet Singh.
Right, the third major party. Singh's been defending his decision to, well, prop up the liberal minority government.
Yeah, pointing to things like the dental and pharmacare programs they got through.
Exactly. Saying it was necessary to achieve those things and also, frankly, to stop a potential conservative majority.
But the polls suggest maybe the liberals under Carney are actually pulling some support away from the NDP.
That seems to be the trend lately, yeah. So the NDP's strategic choices are definitely a big part of the overall election dynamic. It shapes how people vote.
Absolutely. Okay, now for something potentially quite influential, social media.
Yes, the Financial Times analysis you mentioned earlier.
Right. They looked at X, formerly Twitter, and found roughly 80% of posts about the election were critical of Mark Carney.
80%? That's a huge skew.
Isn't it? And most posts about Poilievre were apparently favorable.
Which really makes you wonder about coordinated activity, doesn't it? The FT suggested a network pushing right-wing content.
Yeah, they talked about suspicious accounts, potentially bots that were promoting Poilievre and attacking Carney.
It taps into those wider concerns about disinformation and how it can influence elections,
Definitely. And then you have Elon Musk, who owns X, publicly endorsing Poilievre.
As another layer. And the analysis also found U.S.-based accounts on X were pushing the Canada as 51st state idea too.
So it's not just domestic chatter. There's cross-border amplification happening online.
And interestingly, reports suggest Canadians are actually more worried about this kind of deceptive influence coming from the U.S. than from places like China or Russia.
That says a lot about the unique intensity of the U.S.-Canada relationship, doesn't it? The potential for U.S. discourse to spill over.
It really does. The proximity, the shared media space, it makes it complex.
Okay, just a couple other quick things happening. Elections Canada, because of all those advance votes.
Yes, the counting.
They're going to let some ridings start counting them a bit earlier on election night, just to help get results out in a timely way.
Makes sense. A logistical thing, really, given the record turnout.
Yeah. And then, sadly, there was a fatal police shooting at Toronto Pearson Airport, Terminal 1.
Yes, I saw that. The SIU is investigating.
They're saying it's isolated, no ongoing threat, but still, Premier Ford called it unacceptable.
A tragic incident.
And finally, totally different note, New Brunswick and Newfoundland signed an agreement, a memorandum of understanding on trade between the provinces.
Okay, just some other background events happening in Canada.
Exactly. So let's try and wrap this up. Where does this leave us?
Well, it seems clear President Trump is, maybe seriously this time, pushing this 51st state idea again.
Yeah, and it's all tangled up with the ongoing trade disputes, the tariffs.
And playing out right in the middle of a very tight, very high-stakes Canadian election.
And lurking underneath it all, or perhaps right on the surface, is the impact of social media, potentially skewing the conversation.
It's a really complex mix. You've got the presidential rhetoric from the U.S., the economic pressures, the domestic Canadian politics, and this layer of online influence.
Regardless of who wins on Monday in Canada, these forces seem likely to shape the relationship going forward.
Definitely. The outcome will matter, of course, but these underlying issues aren't just going to disappear overnight.
So the final thought for you, the listener, as you process all this, the 51st state talk, the trade policies, the election dynamics, the social media factor. Maybe think about how these cross-border narratives and relationships might keep evolving. What happens after Monday? What are the really deep underlying currents driving all this?
That's the big question, isn't it? What are the forces truly at play here beyond the immediate news cycle?
Something to ponder. And that concludes this deep dive.